We are keeping all the same steps that we practiced to kind of wrap up the end of last week. So using that box and doing it in reverse. We're adding one new step at the very end, which is just to, and I've been kind of previewing this, I've mentioned it a few times. The last step that we'll be doing now in our process is using zero product property to solve. So everything we've done up to this point, the instructions have just been factor the polynomial. And we did that. Instructions can go a long way in telling you what to do, especially if you're stuck. So one thing I'm going to point out is just what the instructions for this says. Solve the equation, what's also new, equal to 0. Then whenever you see something set equal to 0, that should, boop, and it says solve the equation. What we're doing is we're finding the value of x. And that's what it means to solve an equation. Find the unknown value that makes your equation true. So we're going to go through and do these by following the steps in our box, which have been the same steps we've been doing for the last week. We're going to start by setting up an x. It eventually loads. It's drawn slow. We're multiplying to the number on top and adding to the number on the bottom. So an 8 on the top, our b term on the bottom, which is 6. So two numbers that multiply to 8 but add to 6 would be 2 and 4. So put 2 on one side, 4 on the other. 2, 4. We're going to go through again. We fill in our box by taking our x squared term and our 8 term. So our leading term and our constant, and putting them into the upper corner and the lower corner. And then we put the numbers from the side of our x in the other two boxes. So 2x and 4x. Okay. Going through this just as kind of a refresher. There's nothing new in here. Well, I'm not explaining with a lot of detail. You go through factoring, we get an x and a 4. This will be an x and a 2. So we write x plus 4, parentheses, x plus 2. And then it's set equal to 0, so we have to have it set equal to 0. So I did all this stuff in the middle here with my box, just as a refresher. But we talked about on Friday that there's a shortcut. That we can go when our a term is 1, we can go straight from here to here. So I'm going to draw another arrow to show our shortcut. You go to here, say shortcut. The shortcut only works if, and I'll put our reason again to the side, if a is equal to 1. We can use our shortcut. So this is everything we did last week. Nothing new here. This is the one new step that we're doing today. We get to an answer that looks like this. Something times something equal to 0. So we're going to use our zero product property, which just means we're splitting it off and writing two separate equations. We're saying, all right, we're setting our first equation equal to 0. So we'd say x plus 4 is equal to 0. And then I also put x plus 2 equal to 0. And I just need to solve both. Solving both of these, this is what's going to get me my x values. One of my x values is x is equal to 4. Our other one would be x is equal to -2. So we ended with x's as our answer, not as something with 2 parentheses. So this is going to be important because on your test, there's going to be one set of problems where I ask you to do just this and it's not set equal to 0. Then there'll be another set of problems where you have to solve. Right? Let's say that you solved on the wrong one or you didn't solve completely. I'm going to take points out of that because I'm asking you to do 2 different things. You need to know what the instructions are telling you to do. Right? So my biggest hint is just look for equals to 0, and then you know you're trying to find 2 answers for x and read the instructions.
Could I get subtracted points if I just answered them all like it was 0?
Yes, because would not be following instructions. All right, so 3x squared minus x minus 10. So now this is, we cannot use our shortcut, so I'm going to do this all the way through. Remember, when we have we're taking our a times our c term up here, so we have to take 3 times negative 10. So that would be negative 30. And that has to go on the top too. And then our b term is negative 1. So negative 1 has to go on the bottom. We're multiplying and we're adding. So the factors of 30 that have a difference of 1 be 6 and 5. And one of them has to be negative. If I look at the chart that's on the backboard, if I have a negative on the top, a negative on the bottom, one of the numbers positives, one of the numbers negatives, but the larger number of the 2 is the negative one. So 6 has to be negative, 5 can be positive. So negative 6, positive 5. Oops. All right. Again, the steps are the same as what we did last week. It doesn't change until we get to the end. We're setting up our x and we're filling it in. In this corner, we'd have 3x squared. Our bottom corner, we'd have negative 10. Now my 2 corners, I'll put negative 6x and 5x. So here we have to pay attention to negatives when we factor out. But looking across my first row, the greatest common factor of 3x squared and negative 6x would be 3x. The greatest common factor of my second row, 5x and negative 10, would be 5. Looking down my columns, the greatest common factor between 3 and 5 is 1. So I can just take out an x from both. Remember, the rule is if we have a negative number that starts our row or our column, we have to factor out a negative greatest common factor. Because we need this number and this number to multiply to a negative 6. I know this one's positive, so this one has to be a negative. Also, this has to multiply to a negative. So our GCF of this column is going to be negative 2. And again, we can check. 3x times x is 3x squared. 5 times x is 5x. 3x times negative 2 is negative 6x. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. Everything works. So I take what's my row headers and my column headers. I put them and group them together in parentheses. 3x plus 5, x minus 2. I remember my instructions. It says to solve and it's equal to 0. So I'm going to do the same thing, set it equal to 0. And again, our new step, it's not a new skill because we've done this a lot. We're using our zero product property to say, well, 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. Also, x minus 2 is equal to 0. So we just go through and solve both. This one would be x is equal to negative 5/3. This would be x is equal to positive 2. Again, to get negative 5/3 is from subtracting 5 from both sides, then dividing by 3. Here you just have to add 2 to both sides. Let's use, I guess we can't use the shortcut yet. We'll do C together, then we'll just use a shortcut on D and it'll be quick. All right. If you want to try and just do this one ahead and then check your work, when I get to that point, you can do that. All right. For x, we're going to have 2 times 10 on the top. So again, I think circling and drawing these things helps a lot. So you have a 20 on the top, a 9 on the bottom. They're both positive, that's a good thing. So I know the number on either side is going to be positive. So numbers that multiply to 20 and add to 9. 5 times 4 is 20, 5 plus 4 is 9. So I know a 5 can go on this side. A 4 can go on this side. Let me use the right color. 5 and 4. And again, it doesn't matter. 4 could go on the other side, and so could 5. As long as it's 5 and 4. All right, more factoring using the reverse box. Putting 2x squared in this corner, 10 in this corner. If you do this circling thing, it's kind of nice because then you know what goes here and what goes here, because those are the 2 things that are circled. And then in the remaining corners, we put 5x and 4x. All right, greatest common factor time. Between our first row, 2x squared and 5x, the only thing we can take out is an x because between 2 and 5, the greatest common factor is 1. Between 4x and 10, the largest number that goes into both is 2. So you have a plus 2 out here. Looking down our first column between 2 and 4, the greatest common factor is 2. We have an x squared and an x, we could take out an x. And a 2, so 2x. And then greatest common factor of 5x and 10 would just be 5. So I can't take out an x because 10 does not have an x. So my parentheses pair will look like x plus 2 times 2x plus 5 equal to 0. I go ahead, use zero product property on both of them to get 2 answers for x. So we'd have x is equal to negative 2. I should write out my full equation. I skipped a step. Let me just show that step. X plus 2 is equal to 0. 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. So my answers would be x is equal to negative 2. There, we got it now. And x would be equal to negative 5 over 2. So by subtracting 5 and dividing by 2. So again, this is just a new thing we're doing, adding a skill we already know. Right. Last one is good practice to just use our shortcut, having an understanding of how it works and why it works. So setting this up, our A term is 1, so we're taking 1 times negative 6, which is negative 6, so that goes at the top. And on my B term is a positive 1, so now that goes to the bottom. So we multiply to negative 6, we add to 1. So factors of 6 that have a difference of 1, well, the only would be 3 and 2. If we have a negative on the top, a positive on the bottom, the bigger number of the 2 has to be the positive one. So 3 is positive, 2 is negative. So we take positive 3 and minus. And using our shortcut, is again, you could take the two numbers that are on the side, and that's what goes in your parentheses. So if I kind of set up a fill in the blank, it's going to look like, so it's equal to 0. We have an x here and an x here. And what fills in our second, kind of our empty space in our parentheses, is just the numbers we got on the side here. So positive 3 and minus 2. So we write plus 3, minus 2. Try to put them in the same color just so you can see how the pattern works. So again, since it's set equal to 0 and the instructions were to solve, I have to solve. And solving's easy. I'm just seeing, all right, what makes both parentheses equal to 0. So I can do this extra step of writing out my two equations to get my answers of x. X is equal to negative 3. X is equal to positive 2.